All right. Hello, everyone. Aha. Can we all hear me? Very good. Excellent. And the transcript is working. I just checked that. So no problems there. Okay. Happy Monday. Hope you all are doing okay and that you had a good weekend. Let's share my screen, and get started. The topic for today's lecture is astrology and horoscopes. I guess I like to think of this as part of our space series, right? I always kind of put this in the same week as I do the lecture on aliens and UFOs. I'm kind of thinking that maybe in the future aliens should go with Bigfoot, right? In like a fantastic creatures category. And then maybe we could do something else, some other sort of divination, tarot, dowsing, something like that. That's an idea for future iterations of this class. So bad news if you are an astrology enthusiast. Although I do strive to present a sort of balanced um, uh, take on the material. I'm squarely, personally speaking, within the astrology doesn't work camp. Um, so that will be reflected, I think, in the materials we cover today. However, what I hope to do, I'm sorry to disappoint you. In fact, this is how I explain this class to people, right? I say to them, "Oh, I teach a class called Philosophy of the Paranormal," and people will say, "Oh, well, what do you even do in that class?" And I say, somewhat jokingly, well, I think I disappoint a lot of people, because they sign up thinking that I'm going to tell them how astrology works, and I just end up telling them how it doesn't work, etc. I hope you're not too disappointed today, but if you are, I am going to try and counterbalance that with some cool space facts. Because while I'm not an astrology adherent, I am quite an astronomy nerd. And so you can also think of this as a sort of ask me anything for amateur astronomer, okay? Astronomy was actually one of my highest marks when I was an undergrad back in the day. It was my highest mark until my fourth year when I did slightly better in a philosophy class that I was taking. So um, ask me anything, and I'll give you my amateur astronomy knowledge. Yeah, as far as other lectures in the future, a witchcraft lecture would be cool. I agree, Bell. Um, I am. I'm not sure if that's one that I would be able to do for the special topics because it would require a lot of prep. Because other than that placebo effect stuff that I was talking about in previous lectures, as it relates to witch hunting, it is actually quite outside of my wheelhouse, but it would be cool. Actually, this is a good opportunity to ask you all, because I was going to ask you all anyway. What should we do for our special topics lectures? We have three lectures that we need to decide what we're going to talk about for. Now, the final lecture will so special topics three or the wrap up or whatever I've called it in the course outline. I think what we'll do for that one is simply look over the results of the participation elements. So I'll do some statistics and I'll share all of that with you, and we can see if people's beliefs in certain paranormal phenomena have been affected by what we've learned. And if they have, we can look at how. Do people believe more or less in certain paranormal phenomena and not others, et cetera, et cetera? So that's what we'll do for the last class. That means we've got two classes where we need to decide what I'm actually going to lecture on. We don't have to decide right now, but one that fairly regularly gets chosen is cryptozoology. And the way I do that is I do it as like a Canadian cryptozoology. So it's like a Canadian themed lecture. And the reason I do that is because, well, we inevitably end up talking about Sasquatch or Bigfoot, uh, as he's known in America. We talk about Sasquatch because Sasquatch originated in Canada, in British Columbia. That is where that is the source of the origins of Sasquatch. And we look at some other cryptids very briefly as well, like the Ogopogo, for example. We talk about the difference between cryptozoology and um, I'm hesitant to use the term mainstream zoology, but why is Sasquatch a cryptid, but something like the coelacanth is not? Why would the Loch Ness monster be a cryptid, but you know some newly discovered species of animal is not a cryptid, right? So we talk a little bit about what actually distinguishes cryptozoology as a pseudoscience from zoology, biology, etc. And then we look at the origins of Sasquatch and so on and so forth. Excuse me, my cat is stuck on the mat. Sir, what are you doing, sir? How did you do that? Sorry, my cat really wants to go outside, but he's not allowed right now because I'm lecturing. Go on, boy. Watch out, boy. There you are. Ah, okay. Yeah, so I'm throwing cryptozoology in there as a choice. And I think if you have some other ideas, what we could do, then you should drop those ideas into the Discord server, and then I can put a poll together. I'm going to put cryptozoology in there because I'm very much ready to go with that. Another one that I could also do would be dreams. Dreams, like particularly lucid dreaming and out of body experiences, together with other curious phenomena like maybe sleep paralysis or near death experiences, right? Kind of, I guess it would be like an altered states sort of thing, but that might be fun. So I'm gonna kick those your way, and if you have some suggestions, put them in the Discord server, and I'll put together a little poll, and we can decide as a class what we'll talk about. Yes, the essay proposal. I did a lecture on that. Yeah, Zach's got one of these. One of these is right. Yeah, I think the Wednesday before last. Um, there was the week of the May long weekend. We only had one lecture because Monday was a holiday, Victoria Day, right? So I did a whole big lecture on how to approach the proposal, and then once you've got the feedback, how to take that proposal and turn it into your final essay. So that is on YouTube. Go and check it out. Watch it more than once if you need to, right? I think you should try and get as much out of those instructions as possible so that you can do the best job that you can, right? And if you watch it and you still have questions about anything that I might have neglected to cover, you can reach out via email and I'll try and assist you as best I can. Oh, picking a research topic. Well, yeah, well, if you're really stuck, send me an email. You can also bounce ideas off of people in the Discord server. Um, Really, I mean, it can be tricky pick like it's hard and it's hard and easy at the same time, right? It's easy in the sense that you can talk about anything you want related to um, what we're learning about here. But that also makes it difficult because you have such a big, wide variety of material to discuss. I suggest if there is something you keep coming back to, right? You keep thinking about it, but you always kind of return to the same set of questions or the same theme or same topic. Write about that, right? But yeah, Martha says out of body experiences would be cool. Electron lucid dreaming sounds cool. That's Leo. Yeah. Yeah, usually I'll tell you what really sells the dream topic is I actually tell you how to do it. Um, and we also talk about what dreaming is for. Like, why do we dream? We talk about that. We talk about we get kind of empirical and philosophical, right? I talk about the dreaming brain, but I also talk about Daniel Dennett's essay, Our Dreams Experiences, and I kind of try and provide an answer to his argument that dreams might actually not be experiences, right? So that could be fun. And of course, we talk about lucid dreaming because lucid dreaming is one of those things that used to be studied by parapsychologists until it was established as a real phenomenon, and then it just became a part of psychology, right? So it's an example of something that is, as soon as we know that it's real and have a bit of an understanding how it works, it ceases to be paranormal. And I think that's interesting. So anyway, those are just some ideas. But today, astrology and horoscopes, and a bit of astronomy too. And ask me anything. Seriously, ask me anything you want about any of this as we go, because this is one of those lectures where, I tend to riff on things a little bit. So it's a little less structured than some of the lectures I've done up until this point. So we're going to be looking at astrology. We're going to be talking about what it is, what a horoscope is. A lot of people, I think, might be familiar with the horoscopes that you see in various periodicals, like in newspapers or magazines, or nowadays on, apps. You're going to have astrology apps. I don't, but there are almost certainly some astrology apps that you can get on your smart device that might deliver a horoscope, something like, you know, um, you will overcome a significant challenge this week, right? Sort of little snippet of a horoscope. What horoscopes actually are very, very detailed star charts, but we'll get into that in a moment. We'll explore the difference between astronomy and astrology, an important distinction, because astronomy, astrology and astronomy used to be the same thing. Astronomy matured into a proper science, and astrology didn't. Um, and I think that's interesting. If any of you are thinking about writing for your essays on the difference between science and pseudoscience, right? This is related to a problem that we call the demarcation problem. How do we, how do we distinguish the two? What makes something count as a science, and what makes something merely a pseudoscience? Where do we draw that line? Right, that's the demarcation problem. And a lot of philosophers of science have actually used astrology in their discussions of this. So you might do that as well, right? If you'd like to write an essay on that topic. So we'll talk about astrology. Then we're going to discuss Forer's paper, Bertrand Forer, who did a really nifty little experiment that is actually replicated by James Randi in the NOVA program, Secrets of the Psychics, that I linked in last week's learning materials. It was optional, but recommended, highly recommended. And then finally, we'll discuss the episode of Cosmos that I wanted you all to watch. And we'll reflect on what we've learned today and how Sagan treats astrology. And I think it's really interesting what Sagan does, not just with astrology, but he does this all the time, where, he does not merely debunk, right? He's not like, like those um, internet bros. The internet is kind of, you know what I mean, the debate culture on the internet where it's all about debunking, and not necessarily just debunking, but owning your opponent, right? Like you see those clickbait things like, oh, scientist destroys flat earther with facts and logic. Sure, the flat earthers are wrong, but you can't just stop there. You also have to show people why the methods that we use to find the truth, which do work, science and philosophy and so forth, you also have to show why those are cool. You have to you have to be able to explain to people why the truth is more fascinating and more worthwhile knowing than the false stuff. And Sagan was a master of doing that. And I think he does it quite well in this episode. So we'll talk about that later on. So where's all this come from, right? What's the difference? These are two very similar terms, right? Astronomy and astrology. Let's look at their etymology briefly. Astronomy comes from a couple of words. Astra is from astron here in the Greek, which just means star. And nomos. Nomos is like an order or a law. Like the if I say, something like it could apply to like a human like a set of human laws, right? Like for maintaining public order, but it can also refer to the order of things in nature, right? Because well, while we're on the subject of the Greeks, the Greeks looked at the whole of existence as an ordered whole, which they called cosmos, right? Cosmos is the ordered whole of existence. And it stands in opposition to chaos, which is like disorder, right? So the natural world is an ordered whole. There are laws of nature that govern how the cosmos works. That's the kind of thing we mean by nomos. So astronomos, the order of the stars, right? And astronomers don't just study stars, of course, they study smaller things like planets, moons, asteroids. Now we have dwarf planets, right? It's funny. I was watching just to sort of get into the spirit of things. I was watching some old clips of Bill Nye the Science Guy because I grew up on that. The TVO crawl space in the 90s had Bill Nye. Bill Nye was what finished it all off, right? I sound like an old fart right now, but that was peak television. And in the intro to Bill Nye the Science Guy, there's a little brief moment where it depicts the solar system and names all of the planets, and of course Pluto is still there because Pluto hadn't been demoted yet. But Pluto is now a dwarf planet. So astronomers can study small things, they can study very big things like galaxies. Galaxies are huge groups of stars. We live in one. It's called the Milky Way galaxy. And we have some smaller galaxies that orbit our galaxy, like the Large and Small Magellanic Clouds. Then we have some larger galaxies that are our neighbors, like the Andromeda Galaxy or Triangulum, right? Uh, Nebula. Interesting fact, if you're a philosophy and an astronomy nerd, it was Immanuel Kant who first proposed that these nebula, which at the time just referred to any sort of, not a star or not a planet, but a bright object in the sky. Nowadays, it refers to big, gigantic clouds of gas and dust. But Kant proposed that these nebulae were island universes, basically galaxies, right? Little, big, not little at all, but rather big, massive collections of stars that were very, very far away. And he was right about that, right? Some of these objects that we can see with the naked eye, which you can find in the Messier catalog, they're called Messier objects. You can see them if there's no light pollution, you can see with the naked eye or with with a telescope or a good pair of binoculars. A lot of these are actually galaxies, like the Andromeda Galaxy. You can see with the assistance of not very powerful telescope. Um, that really is an island universe, in the Kantian sense. Other Messier objects are nebula as in the sense that we use that word today. They are big, giant, fields of gas and dust out of which stars might be forming, or they could be leftovers from stars that have died, right? So astronomers study all kinds of cool stuff. Um, I guess astronomy was kind of like my first love, if you think about it. I used to, I get my mom to read, when your parents would read you stories before bed. My mom would read me Isaac Asimov's Guide to the Universe. It was this really great series of science books that I'd get from the library. Um, so yeah, it's my first love, and I've never really gotten over astronomy. It emerged as a science during the scientific revolution. Prior to that, astronomy and astrology, as I said, pretty much the same thing. That's not to say that the Europeans were the only ones doing it. No, absolutely not. It had been developed in the Arab world when Europe was in the Dark Ages. We weren't doing too much astronomy in Europe, but they were doing a lot of astronomy in Dar al-Islam, the home of Islam. So basically, the Middle East, North Africa, um, a lot of astronomy going on there. In fact, as I'll say, well, I'll just say it now. If you look at any star chart, you will notice that most of the stars that we can see with the naked eye have Arabic names. And there's a reason for that. It's because of all the astronomy that was going on um, in the Arabic world. And of course, these astronomers had borrowed from earlier traditions, a little bit of the Greek, but mostly Indian, Persian, before that, Babylonian as well. And there are independent astrological, astronomical traditions, besides these, right? I mean, uh, China has a different astrological system than what we have, right? But all ancient human societies needed to pay close attention to what was going on in the skies um, in order to survive. And this is one of the things that Sagan discusses in that episode of Cosmos. We'll kind of get into the nitty-gritty of that later. So if astronomy is a science and refers to the order of the stars, etymologically, then what's astrology? Well, again, astra from astron, star. And then the ology comes from logos, which can mean reason, true speech, word, right? It can mean word. Here it means the study of. I often think really the terms should be the other way around. If you think about it, like the science that we call astronomy kind of makes more sense if it's called astrology. Um, and then we would call astrology astronomy. That's not the terms we use. That's not how we use those. But I don't know, etymologically speaking, maybe that makes a bit more sense. They were the same discipline. And what I mean by that was that astrology was always kind of, no matter which tradition you look at, whether it's what I'm calling Western astrology or whether we're talking about like Indian astrology or Chinese astrology, pick your system. All astrology is really a means of trying to divine, to obtain information of some kind. Um, it could be, in the case of Western astrology, it could be information about you, right? It could be information about your life or your character. It could be information about what will happen in the future, right? So astrologers would maybe see something new and unexpected, like a comet, and they would try to work out what that meant. The comet is a sign, perhaps, right? A sign of ill fortune, not just for an individual, but maybe for everybody, right? Maybe it signals, maybe the gods are angry, so they've sent a comet to tell us, right? So it's always been about divination, but it's also always been about reckoning time and sometimes location, right? The roots of astrology go back to the roots of like ancient calendrical systems that our ancestors used. Think about it. The stars change, but they change in a regular way, depending on the seasons. You'll see certain constellations all year round, sure, but there are some constellations that you will only see in the winter. And then there are some that you'll see in the summer, for reasons that we'll discuss in a moment, right? So we can keep time by looking at the stars. Obviously, there's one star that's really important for keeping time, and that is the sun, right? The sun. Um, when the sun's up, it's daytime. When it's not, it's nighttime, right? Or think about months. Months are based on the phases of the moon, right? So we use this stuff to reckon time, and sometimes location. Um, and also, maybe if we can tell what time it is, or if we can tell what time of year it is, what time of day it is, when the seasons start and end, then maybe we can also learn something about the future or about our lives, our character, our major life decisions. Maybe the stars can also reveal information about that, right? And that is divination, right? And this is why it's one of the reasons why astrology is regarded as a pseudoscience. You actually get different answers on why astrology is a pseudoscience, depending who you're reading. I mean, some will say it's a pseudoscience, simply because it doesn't it relies on things that we know to be false, right? We know, contrary to the received astrological view when astrology was still a science, that the Earth is not at the center of the universe, right? Um, and some will call it a pseudoscience because um, it makes claims that can't be tested. Others will say it's a pseudoscience because it makes claims that can be tested and which have been falsified. You'll get all kinds of answers, but certainly as a form of divination, right? That makes it, I think, squarely a pseudoscience. And by the way, look, there are lots of astrological traditions from all over the world, but I'm looking at Western astrology today. So that originated in Mesopotamia, so Babylon, Persia, spread to Greece and Rome, and then eventually the Arabic world, and then back into Europe during the Renaissance, during the scientific revolution. There are really interesting, as I've mentioned, really interesting astrological systems that you find in India and China. But I don't really know very much about those ones, so I'm not going to talk about them. Although I do know that I do know a few interesting things. Well, like many of us, if we know our zodiacal sign in Western astrology, that depends on the month, right? But in Chinese astrology, it depends on the year, right? Um, I know I've had some students. I've had quite a lot of students actually who, in their essays, if they're from somewhere in India or somewhere else in Southeast Asia, a lot of them have told me about how before a major event, like a marriage or going to school or deciding what career to pursue, their families might consult an astrologer, right? So it's very big. It's a very big deal in certain cultures. In a sense, astrology as we know it in the West is very like watered down. Because most people, right, if they're familiar with with astrology and with horoscopes, it's newspaper horoscopes, right? It's just like, oh, today you will face a challenge, but you must persevere. These kind of Barnum statements. Uh, Other traditions, I think, preserve a lot more of the of what has kind of been. disregarded, at least in popular astrology in the West, right? Anyway, so it's a kind of divination, which, like divination. I've mentioned an example of divination before last week, right? That was dowsing. Dowsing is a form of divination because you're trying to use like a supernatural or divine means of gathering information, right? In the case of dowsing, it might be you want to know where the water is. So you use one of those Y-shaped sticks, right? Tarot cards, palm reading, reading tea leaves, all forms of divination where you try to obtain information from some kind of divine or supernatural source, right? Um, how is astrology divination? Well, we have to go back to a time when objects in the sky were understood not as stars and planets, but as maybe living beings, right? Like gods. The word for planet in English comes from planetes or planetes, wanderers. Um, the Greeks had Greek names for them, but we know the planets by their Roman names, by their Latin names, right? And the Greeks knew of a number of them, not as many as we know of today, but the Greeks knew of Mercury, Venus, obviously the Earth, the Moon was a planet. It was counted as a planet. Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, and the Sun, right? They didn't call them by those names, but we call them by their Latin names. Of course, after the invention of the telescope, we discovered additional planets, right? We discovered Uranus and Neptune, and then Pluto, although Pluto no longer a planet. And I'm, by the way, I'm team not a planet. I'm just saying, like a lot of my students are still really sad about Pluto's demotion. I say good riddance. Not a planet. Totally not a planet at all. I could clip this. Yeah, professor triggers students. Um, Pluto is not a planet, right? Although I don't want to do that, right? I want to do this, the Carl Sagan treatment here. I'm not trying to be super provocative in case you have strong feelings about whether Pluto is a planet or not. Yeah, I've heard some chatter about this, Bell. The Planet Nine or Planet X, right? What's the deal with that? Is that maybe like some kind of gas giant that exists very far out in the solar system and that we have trouble seeing? Um, oh, that's a good question. Why is Jupiter a planet if it's just made of gas like the sun? Okay, for reals, I would love to answer this question. Okay, so Jupiter is a planet because it orbits a star. Not that stars don't orbit other stars. Stars can orbit each other. Binary systems, trinary systems, etc. But Jupiter doesn't shine by its own light. So Jupiter is made of gas. It's made of hydrogen and some helium and some other stuff. But it does not shine by its own light. There is no nuclear fusion going on, right? So in the sun, through a really interesting process, hydrogen is fused into helium. It's not like direct hydrogen into helium. There's like a sort of process to it that you can read about in more detail if you want to. But basically, the sun, at the center of the sun, it's so dense that hydrogen atoms are squeezed together to produce helium, and this also produces radiation, light, heat, etc. And that's why the sun shines. Jupiter is not massive enough for that to happen. If Jupiter were maybe a little bit more massive, a few dozen times more massive, there would be enough mass that its gravity would squeeze everything together, and perhaps we could have nuclear fusion, and Jupiter would be a star, and we would live in a binary star system. But it doesn't do that. So that's why Jupiter is a planet, even though it's made of gas. But I want to know more about this new mystery planet. Um, is that supposed to be a gas giant? I don't know. I'm going to have to read about this. Because I'm actually not, I'm not up to snuff. I'm not up to speed on this. So the planets are wanderers. Why are they called wanderers? Does anyone know why planets are called are planets? Why are they wanderers? Okay, so who here? Yeah, that's right. Oh, great. Yeah, the weird loop. They move backwards. Yeah, that's called retrograde motion. So if you go outside on a clear night and you find the celestial pole, so the celestial North Pole, since we're in the northern hemisphere, you'll see throughout the night as the Earth turns on its axis, you'll see the constellations turning around the North Celestial Pole. Who knows where to find the North Celestial Pole, by the way? I think it's a good thing to know. What do you say, Belle? How do you locate it? Yeah, Lena, that's pretty good, pretty close. Yeah, if you can find the Big Dipper and you can find the two stars, sort of like on the front of the Dipper part, those point straight up to the handle of the Little Dipper, and that is Polaris. That is the North Star, which sits about at the North Celestial Pole. So Polaris doesn't really seem to move in the night sky, but the other stars move around it every night, and they move around it because the Earth is rotating on its axis. But the planets, over the course of months, they change position in the sky. But they do something else that's kind of weird, like they move, 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 and then for a few weeks, they seem to go backwards. And then they go back the way they were going before. And that's called retrograde motion. So that's why we call the planets wanderers. And they do that because they're orbiting the sun, just as we are. But the Earth will sometimes overtake another planet in its orbit because the farther the planet is, the slower it orbits around the Earth. So, the Earth is going to overtake a planet and then, keep going and we're going to see that retrograde motion because of the relative motions of the Earth and the other planet. Mars has the most apparent retrograde motion um, of all of the planets that we can see with the naked eye. Um, And it was also one of the hardest ones to solve for when we were moving over from the geocentric model to the heliocentric model, which again is something Sagan discusses at length in this episode of Cosmos. So that's why planets are wanderers. And that's also why if you hear, maybe you read a more detailed horoscope and you'll hear like, okay, Mercury is in retrograde and that means this. Well, what that means is that Mercury is apparently, from our perspective on Earth, moving backwards, right? It's exhibiting the retrograde motion because the Earth is overtaking it in its orbit, right? But astrologers are going to throw a lot of these terms at you, retrograde motion, planets, the zodiac. Where's it all come from? Well, again, this all goes back to the same roots of our means of reckoning time and our means of navigation. And so let's explore that a little bit now. This right here, this image that I have, is called a celestial sphere. Astrologers might use this. Astronomers use it. Navigators used to use information like this. Of course, nowadays you can get something like this on your phone, right? I have an app. It's really cool, actually. It's one of those apps where you point your camera up and it shows you the constellations. Well, that's showing me kind of like the inside out view of a celestial sphere where I'm, here somewhere on the planet and I hold my phone up and it's going to give me that slice of the sky. That's the celestial sphere. Remember my astrology teacher, my astronomy teacher had it was almost like a transparent beach ball, but it was a celestial sphere. It was like an inflatable celestial sphere that was like a globe, like a map of the Earth, but instead of the Earth, it was a map of the night sky, right? So that's the celestial sphere, a 3D map of the entire sky with the Earth in the middle. And we know that the Earth rotates, right? It rotates on its axis. So it's turning, and like I was saying before, you have your celestial poles, which kind of extend out from the north and south pole on the Earth. These poles are not aligned with magnetic north or south, but rather these represent the axis on which the Earth turns. So you can check this out in more detail if you go to this link. But yeah, I think that's pretty straightforward. We have our Earth here, and obviously the universe is a lot bigger than this. But if you were to take everything we could see from the nights in the night sky from Earth and put it on a sphere and put the Earth within it, so that everything on this sort of sphere looks like the night sky does from Earth, well, that's a celestial sphere. The celestial poles are align with the geographic poles on the Earth. And there's the equator. There's a celestial equator, which aligns with the equator on Earth. And if you're really interested, if we're talking about going this way, from north to south, we're talking declination. If we're talking going across the equator, we're talking ascension. So that's what all of those terms mean. Here's another, not quite a celestial sphere, not like before, but it illustrates a few other things that we need to know. So, one of the things that you want to understand is that the sun traces a sort of path against the celestial sphere. We call that the ecliptic. And it's not the same thing as the celestial equator. So you can see that here, right? The Earth is here in the center. We have our north celestial pole and our south celestial pole. The Earth's equator is green. And so the celestial equator is green. And the Earth is going around the sun like so. And the path that the sun traces out against the celestial sphere, that is the ecliptic. And that's important to know because that's how we can reckon time, right? If we pass a certain point, here or here, that's spring, or fall, right? When the sun kind of crosses the celestial equator, but remains on the ecliptic. And you can, I don't, Wikipedia is not a scholarly source, but you can absolutely read more about this on something like Wikipedia if you want to. Yeah, lots of interesting things happen when the ecliptic and the celestial equator is crossed. So here at the intersection between the celestial equator and the ecliptic, that's where equinoxes occur. So when the Earth passes this point at the vernal equinox, when the celestial equator meets the ecliptic, that's the first day of spring. And when it does it again, half a year later, that is the first day of fall. See, we use this knowledge to reckon time. Um, what happens? What happens in the summer with regard to the length of the day? We know why these are called equinoxes, right? Is everybody clear on why those are called equinoxes? Let me know in the chat. Also, let me know if I'm throwing too much at you. But what happens on the first day of spring? What's noteworthy about those days? Or the first day of autumn? Well, there might maybe the time doesn't change. No. Yeah, the sun is directly over the equator. And so, and yeah, like Zach says, well, you're close. It's not equal time of the moon in the sky. It's night and day are the same length. That's why it's equinox. Equinox means like equal. Yeah. So the day and the night are of equal length. And then in the summer, what happens in the middle of summer? What do we get? Summer solstice. Longest day of the year. That's right. It's not like there's more hours in the day, right? The day is still 24 hours. Um, but we get the most daylight that we will in the year during the summer solstice. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and like Zach says, the winter solstice is the shortest day of the year. And the equinoxes, it's about equal. Somebody mentioned the moon. Yeah. How do we get a full moon? Curious. Curious if you can tell me. Well, the Earth isn't actually blocking the sunlight during like a new moon when we can't see the moon. When the Earth blocks the sunlight, what that is a lunar eclipse. What we're seeing when we have a full moon is the side of the moon that's fully illuminated by the sun. And when we see a new moon, what we're seeing is not the dark side of the moon, but a moon that we're seeing a moon that's not being illuminated by the sun. So we're not blocking anything, but the moon, we're kind of, if there's a light source, you can do this at home if you've got a lamp, right? And you can hold an object out in your hand. I'll hold this bottle of naproxen. If the light source is, over here, but I'm back here and I'm looking at the moon like this, and the light source is further ahead, well, I'm going to see the side of the moon that's dark. Of course, the moon is tidally locked with the Earth, so we always see the same side of it. But that side can be illuminated by the sun or not, depending on the relative positions of the Earth, moon, and the sun. We'll come back to the moon in a moment. Okay. So if you're familiar with astrology, you've no doubt heard of the zodiac. What even is the zodiac, right? What is the zodiac? Well, the zodiac is all of the constellations that we can see in the sky that appear in the ecliptic. So I'm going to go back. So recall, this is the ecliptic. Here we are. There's the ecliptic, this sort of black disk. And all the constellations that appear along that ecliptic in our celestial sphere are the constellations of the zodiac. You can see them depicted right here. There are other constellations, obviously. Constellations are, this word kind of has multiple meanings in astronomy. Constellations are groups of stars, right? But you can also think of them as areas on the celestial sphere, areas of sky on the celestial sphere. So if you draw the analogy with like a globe that depicts the planet Earth, you can see, there are continents and there are oceans, but there are also borders that divide up different countries and stuff. Um, and constellations are kind of like that, but on a celestial sphere. They delineate different areas of the night sky. So if you want to see all of the constellations, follow this link. You can see all the constellations in the celestial sphere. But these are just the ones of the zodiac are the ones that appear along the ecliptic path. And so when we say, when you have a horoscope done, what's happening is that astronomers are looking at where the sun, the moon, and all the planets were when you were born. So that's why I said earlier, like a proper horoscope is a star chart, not this stuff, right? A proper horoscope is a star chart that will tell you where the sun, the moon, and the planets were in, in what constellations of the zodiac were all of those celestial bodies at the time and place of your birth. And so that is supposed to tell you something about your character, your fate, how your life will go, etc. Right? That is zodiac sign, and we have multiple zodiac signs on astrology, right? Most people will talk about their sun signs, like, and that's what you get in like a newspaper horoscope, right? So if you're a Virgo, like I am, and you're born between August, I can't quite read that, 25th and September 22nd, that means the sun was in that constellation. It would have risen in the morning. It would rise and pass through the constellation Virgo, because that's where the Earth and the Sun are relative to one another. But there's all kinds. Astrologers will tell you that there are all kinds of other factors at play, right? Where's the moon? Where are the planets? Are any of the planets in retrograde? And this is supposed to enable people, again, according to astrologers, to divine information about that person based on this star chart, right? Um, that is the long and short of it, right? And of course, I think something we'll unpack this now rather than saving it for later, but something that I think Sagan does well when he's on the roof. He's on the roof of like 30 Rock or something in New York, and he's reading the newspaper horoscopes. He talks about how, oh, he talks a little bit about how astrology developed, right? We observed uh, a certain configuration of celestial objects at a certain time of year in a certain place. Something happens. Maybe something similar will happen next time, right? It's kind of like an observational, correlational sort of thing. And that's how astrology developed. Of course, when we actually test this stuff, it doesn't seem like there's anything to it, right? But in any case, that's astrology in a nutshell. I know that like professional astrologers would probably take issue with what I'm saying. They would probably say I'm leaving a lot of stuff out. And yeah, that's fair. But that is the gist of it. It's the location of celestial objects like the sun, the moon, and the planets within the constellations of the zodiac at the time of your birth that is supposed to allow one to divine information about a person. That's astrology in a nutshell. Are there any questions so far? Because I want it before I go on, like I said, I don't just want to tell you why astrology doesn't work. I also want to tell you cool stuff about the way we reckon time and how it's connected to the stars and the planets, right? So I don't want to take a break just yet. But does anyone have any questions? The houses. Oh, like when the moon is in its seventh house and Jupiter aligns with Mars. See what I did there? I actually, yeah, I'm not going to go into that because I don't know enough about it. But if somebody wants to, um, yeah, tell us if you wish. I guess, if I'm going from the song, Age of Aquarius, it has something to do with like epochs, um, like certain epochs of the human race, maybe. Um, yeah, if somebody wants to tell us a little bit about that, that would be interesting.
Yeah, I can mention it briefly.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
So basically, again, this is just like a fun added layer to horoscopes and astrology. But basically, imagine like a top-down view of the solar system, and it looks like a plate. It's divided up like a pizza into 12 houses,
Hmm.
and it's just another form of like placement. And like some people can have like the same like sun sign, but have it in different houses, and each house represents something different.
Hmm.
So again, it's just an added layer to of complexity to the whole thing.
Right. Okay. And if there's 12 houses, then, well, there are 12 constellations of the zodiac, right? So, yeah, I see what you're saying. Kind of like a pizza, a celestial pizza.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah. Man, that's gonna make me hungry. Um, so yeah, there's this is not to say that, the stars, like just because astrology doesn't, necessarily work, that is not to say that we cannot find important information in the heavens. Uh, we use, or not so much anymore because we all have smartphones in our pocket or digital clocks on our kitchen appliances, but back in the day, you needed to look up in order to reckon time, right? Like, think about it. Month. A month. What is a month? Well, the word month is cognate with the word moon. That means that moon and month come from the same root word way back in the day. And 1 month is about as long as one lunar phase cycle. So, what is a lunar phase cycle? Well, that's where we go basically from new moon to a full moon and then back to a new moon. Who knows what phase of the moon we are on right now? I was out looking at it last night because I was expecting that maybe the northern lights would be visible. I got a little heads up on my app. I don't have an astrology app, but I have a northern lights app. Yeah, yeah. I think that you're right, um, Kaya, but I'd have to double check. I think I've actually got these mixed up. I think first quarter is actually earlier because a quarter moon or crescent. I might have got some of these mixed up, but yeah. Who knows what phase of the moon is depicted in this picture? Anyone want to guess? It is first quarter right now, or tonight. Okay, perfect. So that means we're on our way toward a full moon. So we're kind of about a quarter of the way, huh? First quarter. We're a quarter of the way through a lunar month. Nice. June 11th, full moon. Hopefully it's a clear night. Yeah, what phase of the moon is this in my slides? Bit of a tricky one. Tricky one. Yeah, I advise everybody to look up if the sky is clear. You can also download an app. Well, I'll just tell you about it. It's free. It is called Aurora. So this is what it looks like. And it tells you the KP index. The KP index or planetary index is a measure of solar activity that's made its way into our atmosphere. And when the KP, at least if you're in Ottawa, if the KP goes above 6 or 7, chances are you can see something. I do recommend using the camera on your phone because they will show a lot more color than you will see with the naked eye. You see the northern lights with the naked eye, especially in the city, and there's a lot of light pollution. It's going to look kind of just like clouds that move really fast. You won't see as much of the color. You can a bit if you're lucky, if it's a really strong show, but it's easier to find where they are by using the camera on your phone. And if you have a phone like mine, I'm using an Android phone. You can download what's it called? It's called Expert Raw. You can download the extra Expert Raw app for your camera, and it basically allows you to operate your cell phone camera as if it's like a DSLR. Gives you a lot more control over the images you can take, and I use that for astrophotography. So, if any of you are interested, waxing gibbous is a good guess, but I'm tricking you. This is actually a full moon. Why is it dark here? Why is it dark there? Well, yeah, a lunar eclipse. This is a partial lunar eclipse. Yeah, this is the Earth's shadow. That's right. I took this from my porch in Ottawa during the last lunar eclipse. Didn't do it with my phone. I used my partner's DSLR. But it's interesting, right? During a partial lunar eclipse, it looks like a bite has been taken out of the moon. And that's because it's gone into the umbra, the Earth's umbra, the shadow. During a total lunar eclipse, that's what you call a blood moon. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, basically, during a blood moon or a total lunar eclipse, the Earth completely covers the moon. But because sunlight is sort of like lensed through the atmosphere, it's refracted through the atmosphere, it lights up the moon in this creepy red color. Very cool. I don't have a good picture from the last lunar eclipse, but I have seen a lunar eclipse, and they're really neat. Like when there's a solar eclipse, you can only see it, at least a total one, you can only see it from a very narrow path. But you can see a total lunar eclipse from almost anywhere on the Earth, which is kind of cool. Um, so anyway, month is cognate with moon because 1 month is about as long as one lunar phase cycle. Um, and some calendars are lunar, some are solar, and some are hybrid, right? So we use the Gregorian calendar. And that's from like Pope Gregory back in whenever. Um, Decided that we were going to use a new calendar as opposed to the Julian calendar. Um, and the difference with this calendar was the inclusion of leap days in leap years. So it's a solar calendar in that it reckons time using the position of the sun. So where is the Earth going? Where is the Earth? Is it summer solstice, winter solstice? That's where we fix our dates. According to the position of the Earth relative to the sun. And it's not perfect, so we insert a leap day every 4 years to make up for the sort of the drift, if you like. There are lunar calendars, though, exclusively lunar calendars. Like the Islamic calendar is a lunar calendar, so it only uses the lunar phases to reckon time, and that's why important dates or even entire months in a lunar calendar like the Islamic calendar kind of float with respect to the solar calendar that we use like at Carleton, right? Or most workplaces, et cetera, they use the Gregorian calendar. So like I remember when I first learned about this, right? It was really neat. Yeah, yeah, they added months and they ruined. Yeah, that's right, because September is supposed to be the seventh month, October the 8th, November the 9th, and December the 10th. But they stuck 2 extra months. So that's why September, which you'd expect would be the seventh month, is the ninth month. Yeah, you're exactly right. Um, Yeah, I remember learning about lunar calendars. It kind of freaked me out. Not like seriously, but I was just like, oh, I never thought we could reckon time that way. It was because I was working with my coworker back in my exactly, Bell. That's where I'm going. That's why Ramadan changes. Yeah, I'm working with my friend, and I have a lot of Muslim coworkers at that Tim Hortons, and everything is kind of based on. the positions of the well, not the positions of the sun and the moon, but like prayer times are calculated based on it's the time of day, which of course changes if you measure days from when the sun rises and sets, right? So that's why if you're practicing and you got to pray a little bit before dawn, and then you got to pray like at midday, and right, you got to do it 5 times. But on shorter days, that's going to be more squished together, and on longer summer days, it's going to be farther apart. Uh, yeah, yeah, that's right. Our months are based off. Yeah, that's what yeah, lunar phases. Um, so when I learned this, oh, you're talking specifically about the Islamic calendar. Yeah, yeah. That's what makes it a lunar calendar. Because it's like, forget about the sun. It's what is the moon up to? And so that's why Ramadan, like I was saying, floats around. And like I said, I was working with my friend and he's fasting. It was the middle of the summer. And I was like, man, that's got to be brutal fasting on such a long day. And he says to me, like, yeah. When Ramadan is in the winter, though, that's the best because the days are shorter. And I was like, what do you mean when it's in the winter? And he's like, oh, well, we use a lunar calendar, so kind of moves around relative to the solar calendar. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And then there are hybrid calendars, like lunisolar calendars. That's the Hebrew calendar. So it's primarily lunar, but they might add a leap month if they need to, because it's hybrid, right? Interesting. So instead of a fixed date, like, May 5th or whatever. It'll just be whatever day the full moon is on because he was born on a day with a full moon. Interesting. So, it just goes to show you, to really understand, before we had these widely available systematized calendrical systems, you had to pay attention to what was going on in the sky, right? Like, what month is it? Oh, well, we have the new moon. Look, there's the new moon. So it's a new month now, right? This sort of thing is even preserved in our names for the days of the week, at least in Indo-European languages. I don't know much about other languages from other families. Excuse me. Just had to let the dog in. So, Indo-European languages, what do I mean by that? These are languages in the Indo-European language family. They all originated from an ancestor language that has been reconstructed by linguists, which we call Proto-Indo-European, that was spoken a few thousand years ago in Central Europe, and it kind of spread all over from there. It's not like every language on the planet is descended from it. They're not. But a good number of languages spoken all over the world are. So the Romance languages, which come from Latin, so French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian, are Indo-European languages. The Germanic languages, um, English, German, Dutch, all of the Scandinavian languages, right? Yiddish, um, they are Indo-European, as is Persian, as is Greek, as is Hindi. And so all of these languages are like more or less distant cousins with one another. And so we can see this sort of preservation of uh, this the astrological significance of reckoning time in the words for the days of the week in these languages. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's what I'm about to explain, in fact, Zach. Yeah. Um, So let's say you speak a Romance language. I'm going to go with French. I don't speak French very well, but I at least know the days of the week, right? So dimanche, Sunday. lundi, mardi, mercredi, jeudi, vendredi, et samedi. So that's Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. But if you speak English, of course, which we all do, you know them as Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. What's going on? These don't sound very similar. How on earth are they related? Yeah, etymology is cool, yes. Well, these words are not, it's not like the word, it's not like moon and month. They're not cognates of one another. They're not descendants of the same words. Um, but rather, they're equivalents. You see, when the Romans, who all spoke Latin, were making their way up into northwestern Europe, where Germanic peoples lived, the Germanic peoples looked at the Roman gods and said, "Oh, these are like equivalents of our gods," right? You know, so we have the sun and the moon. Those are important, right? So Sunday, Sunday. Dimanche is a bit weird. Same with domingo in Spanish. That comes from a Latin word which just means the Lord's Day. So Sunday, the day of the sun in Germanic languages. In Romance languages, it's the day of the Lord. But Monday is, of course, Monday, Moon Day in English. In French, lundi from lune, which ultimately comes from the Latin luna for moon, right? But what's going on here? This is where things start to get really interesting. For me, anyway, because I'm a nerd about this stuff. Where do we get Tuesday from? Well, from tu or tier, depending on what language we're looking at. Tu is Old English, tier would be Old Norse, right? So we get Tuesday. But in French, it's mardi, Mars Day. So what? What was Mars a god of? Yeah, yeah. Mars is a war god. He's the Latin or Roman equivalent of Ares, who, by the way, is kind of a lame war god. Okay, Ares is all like, "Oh, I like war so much," but he's always getting defeated. He's always getting embarrassed and humiliated. Yeah, he's a war god, but he's not like super badass. Athena is actually the badass war god, but we call it Mars. Yeah, yeah. But I think a lot of people they romanticize like I mean, so who, we idealize and romanticize these ancient figures when really they were, they're the gods of the Greeks and the Romans and the Norse are kind of just like bigger, more powerful versions of us, right? They're flawed, right? Um, So yes, Tyr, we don't actually know much about Tyr, but it's likely that at one time he might have had a more important position in the Germanic pantheons. We don't know, but I'll get back to this in a minute. But he could have been a war god. It suggests this is one of the clues we have actually that that was the case because when the Germanic peoples and the Romans encountered one another and they started to say, "Oh, you believe Mars, a war god? That sounds like our guy, Tyr." Also a war god. The stories that we have, like from the Viking Age, for example, which were written down much longer after this, don't have Tyr in this role. So it might have been a role that he had and lost, right? The chief god, of course, in that pantheon is this guy, and that's Odin. But he might not have always been the chief god. It might have been Tyr. We'll see. Um, what about Wednesday? Well, we was just talking about him, right? Woden in Old English, Wotan in old High German, Odin. That's where we get Wednesday. Why is that associated with mercredi? Well, what's this? Where does mercredi come from? I actually think what they do with Tyr in that game is pretty interesting. But I haven't finished playing it, so no spoilers. But yeah, okay. So Wednesday, if you speak English, is Odin's day. But yeah, Mercury is the Roman equivalent of Hermes. They were both messengers. So why would Odin be equated with Hermes or Mercury? Well, it's because they're both psychopomps. They both have an important role when it comes to taking your soul to the afterlife. Hermes or Mercury would collect people's souls in his little horn, and then he would take them to the river Styx, where the boatman Charon, could take them across the river to the underworld. Odin is a psychopomp. Odin basically tries to get you killed so that he can get his Valkyries to take you to Valhalla so that he can use you to fight during Ragnarok. So they're both psychopomps in the sense that they're both taking souls to the afterlife. In English, we have Thursday, which obviously is related to Thor, and Judy related to Jupiter. Why would we equate these two? We've actually talked about it previously. Yeah, lightning gods, thunder and lightning. Thor is not always exclusively equated with like Zeus or Jupiter. Sometimes he's equated to Hercules or Heracles because Thor has a hammer and Hercules or Heracles has a club, and they're both really strong, right? But yeah, thunder, lightning, thunderbolts. That's why they share this day on this interpretation. Although here's the really interesting part, right? The word Jupiter, along with the Greek Zeus, um, the Hindu Dea, and a number of other gods, uh, their name all descends from a Proto-European root, which means Sky Father, Deus Pater, so Sky Father. That is also where Tyr's name comes from. So maybe Tyr used to be kind of equivalent to Jupiter or Zeus, but then he wasn't anymore. Maybe that's why he's associated with, uh, that's why Tyr, Tuesday, and Mars, Mardi, maybe that's where that association came from. Maybe he used to be a war god. And yeah, they do kind of riff on this in God of War Ragnarok, don't they? Um, okay, Friday used to be Frigg's Day. Frigg is a goddess of fertility and love, as is Venus. And of course, Saturn, that's where we get Saturday, which is etymologically related to Samedi. And I think it's really interesting if you look closely, right? All of these names in one form or another, um, they're also named for the planets that you can see with the naked eye. So we have the sun and the moon. We have Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Saturn, and Venus. Pretty neat. And like this is the stuff that we don't even think about in our day-to-day lives. Like, oh, it's Friday or it's Monday. Why is it that day? Oh, it's the day of the moon. What's with the day? Why do we have a day of the moon? Well, the moon was used to be considered one of the planets we could see with the naked eye. And what are those planets? They're wanderers. Maybe they're gods, right? The further you go into the past, the more important all of this stuff is for reckoning time, for reckoning location, for knowing what season it is, right? For knowing when to plant your crops, for knowing where you are on the planet. If you're like a pastoral people and you travel around with a herd of animals, you need to know where you are. If you're from a seafaring culture, you need to know where you are, not just when you are. And so all of this is still kind of preserved in these names for months, for days of the week that we don't even think about anymore. And I think that is just so cool. So that's why I had this whole digression on names of the week, names of the days of the week. Yeah, almost in order. Almost, almost. Isn't that cool? That is so cool. Okay, it's nearly 4 o'clock. Before I talk about marine chronometers with you, I think we should have a little break, and then we'll get back to we'll get back to it. What do you say to a 15-minute break? Excellent. Let's do it. Okay, 15-minute break starting approximately now. I have that's about 3:55. So, yeah, let's stop now. Pick it up again at 10 minutes after 4. See you all shortly. Okay, now we're officially back. All right, so share the screen again. So I left off right around here. I talked about reckoning time, but what about reckoning location using the stars? Well, there's a few ways to do that. We, of course, during the age of exploration or the age of colonization, whichever way you want to describe it, actually, arguably, it was both. We use devices like these. This is a marine chronometer. This is not just used for keeping time, but also for helping to navigate. Before we had things like global positioning systems and such. Basically, this is like a really, really fancy clock, a really accurate clock. They used to actually have competitions with big, big prize money to see who could build the best chronometers. But you would set your clocks thusly. You would keep one set at port time, but as you sailed, you would set the second clock with the rising and setting of the sun. And by comparing the difference between the two, you could work out how far you had gone. That's because measuring latitude is tricky, right? Um, or longitude is tricky. Latitude is easy though. You can use the sky for that. So, let's say you want to know how far east or west you've gone. You're probably going to use something like a marine chronometer. But let's say you want to work out how far north or south you are. Well, all you have to do is look at the sky, right? Remember, not yesterday. Uh, in the first part of the lecture, I asked who could find the North Celestial Pole. A few of you answered, well, you have to find Polaris, and that's the star that's on the handle of the Little Dipper. That's the North Celestial Pole. So if you can find that, you can actually work out how far north or south you are. How? Well, so we know that Polaris is at about the North Celestial Pole, which is like 90 degrees from the horizon, about. So wherever you are in the northern hemisphere, if you can find Polaris and you can measure the angle of Polaris above the horizon, then you know how far north or south you are. If you're in Ottawa, for example, Ottawa is 45.4201 degrees north latitude. That means from the equator to the North Pole, the North Geographic Pole, uh, you go up 45.4201 degrees, and that is where Ottawa is going to be, somewhere on that circle. So if you're in Ottawa, you can look up about 45 degrees into the sky, and Polaris will be somewhere on that circle. You can even do this. You don't even need a complicated tool like a sextant or anything. You can do this with a protractor, right? All you have to do is hold your protractor up, maybe take another straight edge and look along it until you find Polaris, and you will see that that straight edge makes a roughly 45-degree angle. So stars are not just important for knowing what time it is, but also where you are. Of course, prior to the advent of marine chronometers, people did also use the stars for navigation beyond this, but you had to keep very close tabs on where the constellations are supposed to be in port at that time of the year versus where they appear from where you are now, right, in the sky. So, okay, that is the importance of the stars for understanding where you are and what time it is. So there's a lot of important information that our ancestors gleaned from the sky, and they also thought that maybe we could divine other kinds of information from these celestial bodies. Does it work? Well, probably not, right? Not to be disappointing, but think of the astrological system that we use in the West today, right? Ultimately, that comes from like ancient Persian astronomy. But here's the problem. The Earth's axis, doesn't just stay the way it is. Over many, many thousands of years, the Earth actually wobbles like a top. Like, have you ever taken a spinning top and spun it on a surface, and it stands straight up at first, but as it spins longer and longer, it starts to wobble like this, back and forth, before it stops spinning and falls over? You ever notice that? Yeah, they're fun, eh? Tops are fun. But the Earth is kind of like a top, right? It's spinning, but it's wobbling like this. And right now, like at this point in time, I go back here to these previous slides. So right now, our axis tilt is about 23.4 degrees. But, in like 20,000 years or whatever, I don't know the exact number, somebody should check. It's going to be pointed over here. And the North Star won't be Polaris anymore. It'll be something else. Now, owing to the way this tilt is shifting, the zodiac is actually off by one whole sign. Because when the Babylonians came up with this, the Earth was, maybe like this, and now it's like this. So now the zodiac is a little bit out of alignment from the Persians were using back in the day. So am I actually a Virgo? No, not really. I'm actually, I think, a Leo or something, because we haven't really accounted for this drift, right? And I think that's pretty interesting. We today, as well as our ancient ancestors, we looked up into the sky and we saw, with the exception of the sun and the moon and the planets, a sky that was stable, that didn't change, right? If something did change, that would be a bad sign. It would be a portent of doom, right? If a comet appeared, if there was a solar eclipse or a lunar eclipse, people would freak out. They would say, that is a bad sign. We don't want anything unexpected happening in the sky. Of course, we eventually figured out that you could predict eclipses, right? Um, Thales of Miletus was a pre-Socratic philosopher who worked out how to predict solar eclipses. It actually got him accused of witchcraft, right? That was in the 6th century BCE, if I'm not mistaken. Ancient Chinese astronomers were predicting eclipses as early as the 4th century BCE, right? So, um, we figured out that these aren't really surprises anymore, but to the ancient people who didn't know about how eclipses worked, they were quite surprising, right? Oh, really? They were. Interesting. If so, that's a recent development, Leo. Um, uh, Comets, now we understand that comets are, rather like the planets, comets just orbit the sun. It's just that they have very eccentric orbits. So, um, you might see a comet and think, "Oh my God, that's unexpected." But after you observe how it moves, you'll realize that, well, that comet will return one day, right? One particularly regular comet is Halley's Comet, every 75 years or something like that, right? The last time it came around was in 1986, a few months before I was born. If I'm lucky, I will live long enough to see it. I'll be in my 70s, but if I'm lucky, if I'm still here, I will get to see Halley's Comet when I'm an old guy, which I think will be pretty cool. I hope I get to see it. Um, oh, a new sign. I heard something about this when I taught this class last time. A new sign. I don't know what the sign is. Uh, if you know, tell us. Yeah, nowadays, we can predict a lot more, so these unexpected celestial occurrences are less freaky. Although some people who might not necessarily know how this works can still kind of be freaked out, right? I remember not last year's total solar eclipse, but the previous one, the previous North American solar eclipse. I forget when it was. It was like I forget when it was. It was a partial eclipse from Ottawa, where I was at the time. Ophiuchus. Oh, interesting. That's a interesting name for a sign. Must be named after a constellation. But then, you can argue, like, is that a constellation that's in the zodiac? I hope so, because otherwise, yeah. Yeah, so the previous total solar eclipse that was visible from America, from North America, I want to say 2017, but I could be wrong about that. It was only visible as a partial eclipse from most places in Canada. But I remember that was when I was working, I was still in grad school. I was working part-time at Tim Hortons. My manager was sort of a superstitious individual, and I was talking about the eclipse. I thought, oh, eclipses. I'm gonna go look at it. It's not gonna be total, but I did that thing where you take your colander, your kitchen colander that you use for straining your spaghetti, and you hold that up to the sun, and the shadows or the little holes work as pinholes, so it actually casts a little eclipse image, hundreds of them if you have a colander with lots of holes, and that's how I saw that one. Um, I was excited about it, and my manager says, "Oh, that's a sign of the end of the world." And I said, "What?" Because, you know, it's part of something we call the sorrow cycle, right? We know when these eclipses are going to occur, right? Um, it's not a surprise anymore. We figured it out. That is how, when last year's solar eclipse happened, that is how we knew where it would be visible from on the planet Earth, because we know when it's going to happen, and we can do all of the math. So it's not a surprise anymore. Um, Something else that Sagan discusses in that episode of Cosmos is that we can actually use twin studies to show that astrological predictions aren't very accurate. So sometimes this happens where there are identical twins. They're born within minutes of one another, but they're separated at birth. Perhaps they're put up for adoption or something. We actually use twin studies for a lot of interesting stuff. We can use twin studies to understand, for example, the different roles of genetics versus the environment, right? But we can also use twin studies for examining astrology. Um, the these twins will be born have nearly the exact same horoscope. You know, any difference between their horoscopes if they're born minutes apart is going to be so small that it ought not to make a difference. But there are cases where one twin is killed tragically or suffers some kind of horrible demise, you know, maybe illness or injury, and the other twin lives to be very old. How could this be true? How could this work if their horoscopes are nearly identical? They should have the same fate. So we can actually falsify the claims of astrology. And it's not just, that, we can potentially falsify them. We've actually looked and done these twin studies and it doesn't look like these predictions are that accurate. That's a good one. Yeah. Horoscope in this case, certainly. Also, when the sun or the moon or some planet is in a constellation, it's not in within the constellation. It is against the backdrop of the zodiac, and we've carved up the zodiac um, into these 12 or 13 constellations, right? In fact, I think it would be really interesting. This new sign that these astrologers have added, I doubt astronomers have added it. Maybe somebody can check for me. Yeah. Yes, exactly. It's not just twins, but everybody born in a particular hospital on that day should have the same or at least a very similar fate. And we know that that doesn't happen, right? So good point, Bell. But on to the constellations. The constellations in the zodiac and indeed all throughout the celestial sphere, that's how they look from Earth. But of course, these stars are billions of kilometers away. And they're probably also billions of kilometers away from each other. So just take a constellation like the Big Dipper, right? The Big Dipper is not in the zodiac, but it's a constellation that we all know. It's probably one of the ones that we could all find, right? Like if I asked you to find like Cetus, you'd probably struggle. But if I say find the Big Dipper, you're going to find the Big Dipper, no problem, no matter what time of year it is. But that's how it looks from Earth, right? If we were somewhere else in the galaxy, we couldn't find the Big Dipper because the stars don't look the same from elsewhere in the galaxy. Planetary transit progressions are considered. Yeah. Okay, yeah. Um, but what I'm saying now is that those constellations are not fixed. They're not fixed, and their appearance is relative to where you're looking at them from. So it's not like, that's one of the ways in which the celestial sphere and the zodiac is not like a map of the Earth, right? Like if I point to, like right now I'm in North Bay, Ontario, right? So I can be like, okay, this point on the globe is an actual point on the globe of the Earth. But the celestial sphere is not like that. It just gives us the relative appearance of the celestial objects from our vantage point on Earth. If you were to zip across the galaxy, the sky would look completely different if you were on some planet on the other side of the Milky Way. And you would have completely different constellations of the zodiac. And then if you were to look at the same constellations that we could see from Earth, they would look unrecognizable, right? And yes, as Kaya says, planetary transits and so forth are considered, but the stars' positions also aren't fixed, right? They look fixed from Earth because they're so far away, but stars are flying through the cosmos at incredible speeds. So even from Earth, thinking about the axis tilt, the changing axis tilt, but also the changing positions of the stars, in 50,000 years, the night sky would look completely different. The constellations of the zodiac would be completely different, right? So these constellations aren't discrete entities. They're changing. And stars themselves change, right? Stars die. Stars eventually die, right? Who here had that existential crisis that you get when you're a little kid and you learn that one day the sun will turn into a red giant and engulf the earth and then slowly die over, we've got like 5 billion years, but yeah, like I remember learning that. And even though I knew, oh, it's 5 billion years in the future, I still was like, oh, are you kidding me? That gave me my first like my first experience of existential dread was learning that one day the sun will cease to exist. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that's another one. That's like what Kaya says here about how there's more stars in the universe than grains of sand on all the beaches. That kind of reminds me of like how Immanuel Kant talks about the sublime, like where there is something that's just so big and incredible and awesome that you just can't grasp it. Um, that's what the stars versus grains of sand on the beach, does to me. And that can be frightening, but it can also be amazing, right? Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because the Earth is about, on average, 8 light minutes from the sun. So the light we're seeing from the sun, like the light shining through this window right now, left the surface of the sun about 8 minutes ago. The photons that were generated via nuclear fusion within the sun take much, much longer to bounce around all those atoms. They're getting absorbed and re-emitted and reabsorbed and re-emitted for like something like 1 million years before they finally leave the surface of the sun, and then they take 8 minutes to reach us. That is also pretty neat. Um, And maybe you can see this stuff, if you're lucky, within your own lifetime, right? There is a star, I forget the name of this star, but it's a binary system where we have this white dwarf orbiting a larger star, pulling matter from it. And it will go supernova. Probably this, not supernova, but it will go nova this year. And we know this because we know very well the amount of mass it takes for a star once it's packed on for it to go nova. And that will be a new bright star that we can see in the night sky probably this year. Um, that's awesome. It's like maybe Betelgeuse will go supernova and we could see that. Yeah, sorry if I'm messing with all of your heads. But yeah, I'm gonna have to Google because I can't remember the name, but I know it's a binary star. What's that star that's about to go nova? Just so that I can remember the name. All right, T Coronae Borealis. It's a star system. Yeah, it will be briefly visible to the naked eye. Yeah, it's a white dwarf and a red giant. So the white dwarf is much smaller. Um, it's pulling matter off of the red giant, and once it's accumulated enough, it'll kind of explode. And all its outer layers will be shed in a big explosion. Yeah, now or no. You guys. But that's going to be cool. Like, make sure you make a point of seeing that because that is like a once in a lifetime thing. And that is so neat. But it illustrates the fact that, stars are not, the night sky is not this fixed place that doesn't change. It's a dynamic place, but the changes happen slowly because everything is so far apart from one another. And it can seem to us on Earth with our very, very short lives that the stars don't change, but they do, right? Yeah. Yeah, don't sweat the petty things. The sun will explode one day, right? It's crazy to think that we are, these little tiny creatures on this planet, but the planet is also changed. I was thinking about this the other day, I was thinking about it in the context of like continental drift, like how like, oh, the Earth, like that's the Earth and that's the way the continents look. But no, it's almost like the Earth is alive and changing because like millions of years ago, the continents were all different and it's the same planet, but now it looks different from before. Kind of like it's like the ship of Theseus problem, right? Um, yeah, very cool. Very cool. These are just some points that are drawn from readings that I don't actually have my students do anymore because they were kind of lame. Um, But Charles Day, in one brief article, remarked that astrology persists because it provides or claims to provide a basis of understanding ourselves and others and our place within the world, which is something we all want, right? Um, it also sells, right? It sells. The one thing I don't like about this article is he kind of points the blame at women. Like, and that's why I'm not having you read it, right? He's kind of like, oh, yeah, it's if only these women weren't buying these astrology magazines. Oh, you ladies, and I'm just like, come on, man. Like, we've mentioned this before, and this was discussed in the astrology lecture last time I taught this class. But there is no shortage of equivalent bunk amongst men. I mean, let's be real about that. Um, yeah. Oh, that's a nice point you've made there, Zach. Yeah. Same moon, just slightly farther away. Yeah. Yeah. Like, I like how I'm looking up at the stars and the moon, and I'm seeing the same celestial objects that my distant ancestors saw, that all of our distant ancestors saw from way back when we were just hunting and gathering, right? That's pretty cool. Um, but yeah, Day's little remark. I just think it's a little uncharitable toward women, like as if women are less skeptical. Um, as we mentioned in a previous lecture, I think there might be reasons why astrology or perhaps other paranormal beliefs appeal more to women and also to LGBTQ people. Not all of them, but I always think every time I do this lecture, I'm reminded of I forget what season of RuPaul's Drag Race it was. It was the one with Adore Delano. Anyone remember the one I'm talking about? Maybe it was All Stars season two? Or I don't remember which one. But anyway, one of the contestants, Adore Delano, how does she introduce herself? Well, if I remember correctly, it was I'm Adore Delano and I'm a fucking Libra, which I thought was hilarious. But also that's burned it into my brain, right? Like, okay, I know that women and LGBTQ people are more interested in certain paranormal beliefs. But then, like we remarked last time, and has come up in previous iterations of this class, in the whole like bro, the manosphere they call it, right? The manosphere, right? The Joe Rogan listeners, the those guys, the alphas, the betas, the sigmas, right? You know what I mean? That's just zodiac signs for dude bros, right? Like the symbols of the zodiac, the way they use these ideas, alpha, beta, whatever, are not scientific categories, right? They're not scientific categories. But I've even seen these little quizzes pop up on my Twitter feed like, what kind of man are you? Take the quiz and find out if you're an alpha or a beta or a sigma. Like, and of course, those quizzes are those are just for data mining. You shouldn't do those quizzes. Um, so yeah, I think Day's kind of unfair to women in his little piece, which is why I didn't have you read it. But I thought I would mention. I think one thing he is right about is that it can be a source of meaning for people. Um, Obviously, there's an appeal, which is why there is still a market for this. And again, this is just looking at Western astrology, right? This is like, maybe a few of us will go to an astrologer, but most of the time we're reading a horoscope because we've purchased a newspaper or a magazine or something like that, right? And there's still a lot of money in it. Like there are in other cultures, right? In parts of Asia, right? People will go to astrologers, pay lots of money to find out what they should do, right? You might consult an astrologer before you get married to see if the person you're thinking about getting married to is a good match. You might do it if you're seeking a job, or if you're thinking about going to university, right? Before you might see an astrologer for any number of really big life decisions, and you'll pay a fee for that. And this is a big industry outside of the West as well, right? So, interestingly, Anderson and colleagues actually report that a belief in astrology is related to higher self-reported levels of narcissism. Now, this does not mean that if you like to read horoscopes that you are a narcissist. Okay. It doesn't mean you have narcissistic personality disorder, right? It doesn't mean that. It means that maybe you have a higher levels of the personality trait. So you're interested in yourself. You like yourself. You want to know more about yourself. Well, okay, maybe you consult a horoscope, right? And there's probably a lot of other factors at play. Okay, there's levels of intelligence or levels of education, right? If you're very clever, right? If you're like an astronomy nerd like I was, I'm not the smartest guy ever, far from it. But I was a really precocious kid and I learned a lot about astronomy at a young age. And so, I remember I forget, I think it was my birthday, and I had some relatives who were like, what does Josh want for his birthday? And my parents say, Josh really likes astronomy. So, what do I get from my aunt and uncle? A book on astrology, because I guess they thought it was the same thing. But, I'm reading through it and I'm like, oh, this is weird. What are they talking about? Sun signs and moon signs and horoscopes and what? It was weird. It was weird. It didn't really jive with me, because I was like, but that's not how space works. This is how space works, right? Or if you have the opportunity, when talking about education, if you have the opportunity to take a course like this one, you might it might lower your likelihood of belief in astrology, or if you do believe, it might make you question some of those beliefs, right? Um, People who are poor at reasoning about probabilities tend to believe in paranormal phenomena more than those who are better at reasoning about probabilities. So, then again, we're all susceptible to certain things like apophenia, pareidolia, confirmation bias. But probably the main thing that's going on in astrology as we know it in the West, for lack of a better term, is the Barnum effect or the Forer effect. So let's look at that now. And this is from This is from our little reading. Well, let's talk about confirmation bias briefly, just to get that out of the way. Remember that this is a cognitive bias that all of us have, right? Where we tend to remember information or attend to information more closely when that information supports our worldview. So you can think of it as like remembering the hits and forgetting the misses. Maybe you zero in on stuff from your horoscope that turned out to be true, and you forget about all the other stuff that wasn't true, right? Um, but probably it's the Barnum effect. This was identified again by Forer, but it was named after P.T. Barnum by Paul Meehl in the 50s. I think his essay, the essay was titled "I'm looking for a good cookbook" or something like that. It's got an interesting title. But basically, the Forer effect or the Barnum effect refers to when people ascribe high accuracy to these statements, which are supposed to be specific to oneself, but which are actually so vague that they could apply to anybody. Why is it named after Barnum? Why do we know it as the Barnum effect and not the Forer effect? Well, Barnum was a showman, right? The Barnum and Bailey circus had something for everyone, right? So maybe you can imagine a sort of P.T. Barnum-esque character, operating something at an amusement park or inviting you in to see his little warehouse of curiosities, right? Or to volunteer as a participant in a stage magic act. He might say something like, "You there, you look like a smart young individual." And you'd say to yourself, "Oh, why, thank you. Of course I am." Of course, that could apply to anybody, right? Um, so something for everybody. That's the Barnum effect. Now, Forer does a really interesting experiment with a group of his psychology students. He comes up with this fictitious personality test called the Diagnostic Interest Bank. And he has everybody take this test. And later, he gives them a series of statements, which he told his students, about 40, were generated from the results, were generated from the personality test they completed. So I take this test, I'm answering questions, right? I'm answering questions that are put to me in this test about my personality. Give that to the professor. Professor takes it and says, "Okay, I'm going to compile a little set of statements generated from the information I got from your personality test, and then I'll give you that individualized report, and you'll have to agree with or state or rate the extent to which you agree with the statement." So I take my test. I think these are my results. So okay, first result. I have a great need for other people to like and admire me. Okay, yeah, maybe. So I have to then rate the accuracy of that statement from, 0 to not very, which is not very accurate, to 5, which is very accurate. Okay, I have a great need for other people to like and admire you. Sure, okay, I guess maybe 4 out of 5, right? You have a tendency to be critical of yourself. Oh, who doesn't? 5 out of 5. You have a great deal of unused capacity, which you have not turned to your advantage. Yeah, I mean, don't we all? Give that one 4 out of 5, right? And so on and so on, right? Personality weakness, you are generally able to compensate for them. I mean, probably going to get high agreement. Your sexual adjustment has presented problems for you. Hey, join the club. Disciplined and self-controlled outside, you tend to be worrisome and insecure inside. Sure, I don't know, maybe 4 out of 5, right? Um, you get the idea. So these are supposed to be like, okay, this is I do this personality test and this is what I get back individually based on my test, right? These are my specific results. And then I rate how I agree. And agreement ratings tend to be quite high. In fact, the sample, all 39 students gave ratings as described earlier. And the average agreement ratings across all of these statements amongst all of the students was 4.3 out of 5. So that's very high agreement with these statements. But here's the catch. These statements were not derived from the personality test. They were taken from horoscopes in the newspaper. And each student got the exact same results. So if you watched the episode of Secrets of the Psychics, you saw James Randi replicate this in a college classroom. And you saw what happened, right? Everybody got a sealed envelope with this, all thinking this was individually tailored to them. And they all voted like, this is like 4 out of 5, 5 out of 5. This describes me to a T. And then they were asked to pass their test results back to the person behind them and get the ones from the person in front. And they were all very surprised to see they had all got the exact same results. And we call this the Forer effect, the Barnum effect. The idea that these statements, these would all be Barnum statements, we call them Barnum statements, are so vague that they could apply to anybody, but they're worded in a way that they seem specific to you. So those are Barnum statements. Those are the kinds of statements you see in newspaper horoscopes. I mean, after all, these were taken from newspaper horoscopes, right? Like, at times you are extroverted, affable, sociable, while at other times you are introverted, wary, and reserved. I mean, come on. That is so broad. Sometimes you're extroverted, sometimes you're not. That could describe anyone, right? So that's those are Barnum statements. Likewise, certain personality tests suffer from this problem too, like the Myers-Briggs. Kaya, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just a little that I don't know. That study I think is interesting just because I think that it paints really broad strokes over people. That's like if I said that everyone with glasses is a nerd. Like they're taking one really small aspect and applying it overall. Like I wonder if they did sort of like some form of cold readings where they like gathered people's information and like had an astrologer like look into their specific charts and then present them uh with statements whether or not the scores would be the same across the board or if they like took someone else's like astrology report and gave it to someone who isn't those signs would there be similar scores when all people test with different statements just because I feel like this is like really like very broad, which newspaper horoscopes are meant to do in the first
Yeah.
place.
I don't know if that's been done in a like in the context of like a psychology study, but I know that it has been done by James Randi's educational foundation. I know that they've done some like investigations where try and they'll get somebody to put together a detailed horoscope and then but they haven't met the person that they're doing the horoscope for, and then they look at the horoscope and judge its accuracy. They have done stuff like that, but probably the sort of broad, overgeneralized nature of um, Forer's study is due to the fact that he's not actually going after astrology. What he's actually doing is trying to show that there are problems with personality tests, right? So, who's taken the Myers-Briggs personality inventory, for example? Yeah. Okay, a few of you. Yeah, I took it back when I was in business. I went to college and I studied business. Can you believe that? Oh, of course. Zach for a Carleton class about careers. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Okay, so the Myers-Briggs suffers from the same problem, right? The Myers-Briggs is a bunch of Barnum statements, right? Um, yeah, I'm not a finance bro. Oh God, I was living in bad faith. Oh, that sucks. Yeah, because the Myers-Briggs is nonsense. Um, you know, it's like, yeah, don't even bother with the Myers-Briggs. Yeah, no, I would say I was living in bad faith. You know what I mean is like I was not being my authentic self. I didn't know what to do in high school. I wasn't a bad student, but I was a bored student. The only thing I was interested in was music. So I was in the band and everything. But other than that, I was like, why am I here? I don't give a poop about any of this. Um, Didn't know what to do. Took a year off after high school where I worked as a garbage man. I never prepared for going to university because I didn't think I was capable of it. Because again, I was one of those weird kids that kind of fell through the cracks. You know, the kid who knew all of the astronomy when he was, you know, the first grade, but also didn't think he was smart enough to go to university. I don't know. I guess I fell through some cracks in the system somewhere. So I took a year off. Then I go to college studying business admin because that's what you study if you don't know what you want to do with your life. And then I had some professors there that were like, you could actually, I think you'd actually be really good at university and you could use some of your college stuff to get in instead of, you know, having high school university credits, you could transfer in from college. So that's what I did. And then I went all the way through. I got the BA, the MA, and the PhD. So I guess it turns out I was pretty good at university. Um, but I do remember, you know, doing the Myers-Briggs in high school, sort of like career prep, and again in college. Um, I think I was an INTJ, right? But a problem that these tests suffer from is that the statements are so vague that they could apply to anybody. And what Forer is specifically looking at is like how people judge the accuracy of these statements. So he's looking at, you know, like the average rating of like 4.03 across all of these statements. Then, you know, that's quite high. But these statements weren't even generated using the personality test, right? He just pulled them from newspapers. So he was able to show that people can like subjectively evaluate the results of personality tests very strongly, but that shouldn't be used as a measure of how good the personality test is because you can do this. So that, you know, I understand that, you know, if you're into astrology, you're going to probably want to nitpick for her a little bit. And I'd say fair. But it is a real effect that we see. It's the same thing like when you know, like in a fortune cookie, like nobody really believes that the fortune in a fortune cookie is going to come true. It's just a fun thing we do, right? But those statements in the fortune cookies are Barnum statements, right? They're like so vague they could apply to whoever opens that cookie. And you know what? They're fun, right? They're fun. Um, yeah. So let's talk about the conclusions that for reach the claims of validity for their methods and results by pseudo-diagnosticians can be duplicated or surpassed in the laboratory without the use of a diagnostic instrument. I would say this has more to do with astrology than it looks like it does. Um, you know, what this is saying is like, look, it's kind of like what I was talking about a moment ago. We can come up with some nonsense results without even the proper use of a diagnostic instrument. And we can duplicate or surpass the results, you know, even when there is a methodology by just making it up. And moreover, um, people, you know, as it says in conclusion two, people will still regard these statements as accurate, even if they're nonsense or if they're Barnum statements, if they're too vague to specifically apply to anybody. So we shouldn't use, you know, we shouldn't use these means of validating personality tests, right? Um, we can probably skip the rest of these, but we'll go down to the bottoms for those of you. I hope you all read Forrest's paper, but I know that not everybody does. Um, but Forrest seems to attribute all of this to just people being gullible. And I think that might be a little bit uncharitable. And I was just wondering what all of you think about that. I think this is the example of what we don't want to do, right? Like, I'm a skeptic, and I'm trying to teach all of you, whether you're skeptics or believers, about naturalistic explanations for all of these phenomena. And my hope is that even if you believe, you still exercise a healthy amount of skepticism. But one thing that I would feel really like icky about doing is saying, oh, if you believe in this, you're just gullible. Like, I mean, it's an example of something that, that Carl Sagan does not do in his writings and in his TV presentations. And yeah, I'm just wondering what you make of this. Um, so please, if you have any thoughts, go ahead, either in the chat or raise your hand. I mean, I'll just ask the people who believe in some paranormal phenomenon or another. You would probably take offense if I said you were just gullible, right? Right? Somebody please help me. Somebody. Okay, someone said something. Yeah. So Kaya says kind of, yeah, yeah. Like we wouldn't want to do that. We wouldn't want to do that. Leo says, I think it's caused more by wanting to believe something than by gullibility. Yeah. Like with the example phrase, you have a large amount of untapped potential. That's something we all wish were true. So we are more likely to accept as true. Yeah, it's kind of like an aspiration. We all, it's aspirational, right? We all want to believe that we can, we're full of potential and we can tap that potential, right? Yeah, Will says it's dismissive, and I agree. He might be talking about gullibility as a sort of personality trait, but then that kind of leads him into a circle where it's like, how do we establish the existence of such a trait? We got to do personality tests. And he's just written an entire paper on why those are problematic. So Kaya says, I think it all ties back to capitalism. Yeah, you mean like can I think I know where you're going with this, but can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of joking, but what I meant by that was if you tell everyone that they have a potential and that there's meaning behind everything and everything happens for like a larger purpose, you get these people who are motivated to work harder and try and like achieve that success or something that has been like drilled into them that they have to do and that
Yeah.
they're told that they will be able to accomplish if they just work hard.
Yeah, I get that. Because capitalism is all about productivity, right? And you need your workers to believe that they are actually capable of being productive to get them to make you your money, right? Um, that's another thing I became after dropping out of business school. I became cynical about capitalism. But yeah, that's good. Um, and that's another thing that reminds me of that episode of Nova with James Randi, right? When he goes to Russia, and it was right after the fall of the Soviet Union. So all of a sudden there was like capitalism, and what happened? A lot of like flim flam artists appeared on the scene. Not necessarily as astrological, but there was a lot of like alternative medicine stuff, and a lot of parapsychological stuff that really boomed after the fall of communism. Yeah, I want to believe, right? Like, I want to believe, maybe not in aliens, but in myself. Um, Zach says, I think linking it to gullibility dismisses the emotional reasons that someone might believe in the paranormal. Yeah. And Kwan says, it is normal to believe in something, even if it does not make too much sense in some aspects. Yes. I mean, forget about gullibility. Think back to Yench. I know we keep returning to Yench and what he says about the uncanny, but what does he say at the end of his essay? He says something about like The human desire for intellectual mastery over the environment is a strong one. We don't like not knowing, right? There's a dislike of the unknown and the unfamiliar. It's called Mysonianism, right? We don't want to not know. We want certainty. Our brains like certainty. And astrology might provide a little bit of that. Again, this is the point that Charles Day made in the little quote that I had on our previous slide. We don't like uncertainty. We want to be certain. Astrology might provide that for some people. That's not being gullible. That's just, pushing our evolutionary buttons the way they want to be pushed. Um, so that's what I think. Okay, last little bit. Um, who watched the episode of Cosmos? I really hope you all watched it because it's so good. The whole series is good. I know it's a bit dated, but it is probably like the best science educational thing ever. I'll die on that hill, by the way. Oh, good. Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, I love it. Carl Sagan was just awesome. So good. But I love what he does in this episode because he gives us an account of astrology. He discusses, not the same things we discuss today, but similar in a similar vein. He talks about our reliance on the sky and the stars, the planets, the sun and the moon, for navigation, for reckoning time. And then he does something really cool where he talks about Johannes Kepler, the discoverer of the laws of planetary motion. Right? Like he's like yes, billions and billions of years old. He's got a great voice for hosting a television program. But it's true. And I really encourage you all to watch the entire series because Sagan is Sagan really does a great job of showing you, of illustrating how you can get that sort of mystical or spiritual sort of thing um, from um, just natural science. Yeah. Oh, Tycho. I was gonna say thyroid. What? Yeah, Tycho Brahe. Um, who was the observational guy. Like Tycho Brahe had an observatory. And this was before the telescope. So these observatories were like big, like semicircles, almost like a big protractor on the floor. And you would stand at a certain point in order to take the angles and the measurements of different celestial objects. It's very cool. There's actually, I don't know if you guys are into anime, but there's a very interesting anime on Netflix called Orb. And I say it's interesting because it's always interesting when Japanese media does something with European history. Because there's like little weird things like that maybe the characters will bow as is customary in Japanese society, even though they never did that in Europe. But anyway, in this show, it's about like these heliocentrists in Poland in right before the scientific revolution, who are like trying to figure out how the solar system works, but also trying to keep it hidden that they believe in the heliocentric model because they'll get executed for heresy, right? So that's really interesting. It's an interesting program. It's a little slow, but it's kind of fun if you're into that. But yeah, Tycho Brahe was the observational guy. He had the data, and Johannes Kepler was the math guy who did the calculations, and he worked out the three laws of planetary motion. I really like what they did. Like Kwan says, he gives the context of astronomy and astrology, but he really does a great job of, I think, not only storytelling, but sort of painting a picture of this fellow who was committed to this sort of Pythagorean Ptolemaic understanding of the solar system, like so committed to it but nonetheless had to abandon it in the face of the evidence and still found, discovered or co-discovered something new. Um, he actually made the geocentric or the heliocentric model better um, by working out that planets move in ellipses and not circles. And I'll say more about that in a moment. But yeah, it's a great means of showing how you don't just debunk. You can't just debunk, but you also have to show why the truth is even more exciting and fascinating than what is not true, right? And that's why I provide so much background on astrology here, because Sagan doesn't really do that. But yeah, he focuses on Kepler, believed in astrology, the sort of Pythagorean understanding of these planets nested in these perfect solids and so on, which goes all the way back to Pythagoras. But they figured out how it all worked, and this is how we got from like the Ptolemaic model, a geocentric model based on the theories of Claudius Ptolemy, who was an ancient astronomer. He was one of the Greek rulers of Egypt, following the conquest of Egypt by Alexander the Great, right? So he was one of those Ptolemies, right? Alexander left one of his generals in charge, name of Ptolemy, and then Alexander the Great died, and the Ptolemies ruled Egypt all the way up until Cleopatra. Um, and then it was following, all of that with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony that Egypt fell to Rome. But Ptolemy developed a geocentric model, which eventually got replaced with the heliocentric model, which I have here, right? So this is the geocentric model of Ptolemy with the Earth at the center and the sun, the moon, and the planets. And look, you can even see the zodiac going around. And this is the model of Copernicus, which has the sun in the center, the Earth here, the moon orbiting the Earth, and then the other planets going around the sun. And oh, look what we have here. It's also the zodiac. Interesting, huh? Now, interesting fact, this model that Copernicus introduced did not work any better than this model in terms of understanding the positions and movements of the stars and the planets. It did the job just as well. It was just simpler. So we've talked in this class about parsimony, right? The like Occam's razor. The simplest answer is the correct answer. Or in its other formulation, do not multiply entities beyond necessity. The Copernican model was simpler, and it just had the sun in the middle and the other planets going around the sun. Ptolemy's model to explain retrograde motion, and this is something that Sagan talks about in this episode of Cosmos, has these like extra wheels that the planets sit on. So the planets are going around these wheels that are orbiting the Earth, and that's what explains retrograde motion. That's multiplying entities beyond necessity. This was no more accurate in terms of predicting the motions of the planets. It worked just as well as this. It was just simpler, which is one of the reasons why it eventually replaced this model. In addition to the fact that the sun actually is in the center of the solar system, that's important too. Can't forget about that. But it didn't work any better. Why? Because Copernicus had the planets going in circles. It was Kepler who worked out that the planets actually go in ellipses, not circles. Um, so I don't know. What do you think? Let's just wrap it up with a little discussion. We've got a little less than 15 minutes left. What do you think? How have your opinions on astrology changed, if they have changed, after learning about what we've learned today? And if it has changed, I mean, do you feel like you know more? You're better equipped in your astrological or astronomical knowledge? What do you think? I'll wait for somebody to hop in the chat, or you can raise your hand if you want. Well, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of the skeptic. I'm glad. Yes, now you know what retrograde means. It just means going backwards, right? Look, I'm saying look, if so remember, being a skeptic doesn't mean, oh, that's baloney at like everything, right? Or that's dumb. If you believe this, that's dumb. Those are dumb beliefs. No, that's not what skepticism means to investigate. And that's what we're doing here. Even if you believe in some paranormal phenomenon, you should still be skeptical. You should still be willing to investigate and interrogate your own beliefs, right? To see if they rise to the level of to see if they count as knowledge, right? Wow, a lot of you learned what retrograde means today. Yeah, yeah, that's good. But yeah, I don't believe in astrology myself. But I think it's interesting to learn about how as we were talking in the first half of the lecture, I think it's very interesting to learn about how these old ways of reckoning time and location are still preserved in the way we talk about calendars and so forth, right? I think that's really cool. I think there are some connections to this animistic view of the universe that Jentsch and Freud talk about in astrology, right? As well. Um, Kayla says, I don't necessarily believe in astrology, but I am not entirely willing to dismiss the idea that we are affected by the stars and the planets. Well, sure. I we are affected by the stars and planets. Um, we are very affected by one star called the sun. The moon is responsible for tides, right? The sun for our weather. Um, So we are affected. And this is not trivial, right? This is not in a trivial sense. Like we are quite literally affected. Jupiter is like a cosmic vacuum cleaner. Like Jupiter is so big that it just kind of sucks up asteroids and comets that might otherwise make it to the inner solar system and hit us, right? So we are, in a very non-trivial way, affected by the planets and the stars, right? And that's fascinating. That's fascinating. Um, I only believe in astrology if it's funny or accurate. Yeah. There's the confirmation bias, right? I know you're joking, but like this horoscope is very accurate. I believe in astrology. Then you forget all the inaccurate horoscopes, right? Um, Bell used to believe, but found a popular app you were using was baloney. Capitalism. And you got disillusioned. Yeah, fair, fair. Leo does not believe, but does not think you're stupid if you believe. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's pretty harmless. I think it's as with everything, just don't spend too much of your money on it, right? I would say. I do think that yeah. Okay, yeah, yeah, I have fun with the fortunes in fortune cookies. Yeah. Um So Kaya says, it's not about predicting the future. I don't think you sound like a tinfoil hat person, but when you get to more specific things like aspects and move just beyond looking at sun signs, it's harder for those very specific statements to apply to everybody. True, but I still think that this is something that's empirically testable, right, with the twin studies. And those twin studies don't paint a very good picture. But if you do believe, like, I wonder if it's kind of like a sort of animism, like are the planets? I think ancient astrologers probably understood the planets as either gods or some kind of force. But I wonder how is it that if you are like a 21st century astrology believer, how do you think that the it is that it works, right? Um, I'm curious. I'm just curious. As a skeptic, that's like a question that I'm curious about. Like how would it work? Um, yeah, Camilla says it's pretty harmless. I don't get it when people say they don't vibe with certain signs. Yeah, I don't get that either. Like, oh, I could never date a such and such a sign. It's like, oh, hey, that's a little discriminatory. Um, yeah. Yeah, I mean, maybe you can learn something about yourself. Like Bell says. I just don't understand how it's supposed to work, right? The light, um, okay. How does maybe the light shining from planets could affect us somehow, but I don't really understand how. The gravity, the planets are too far away. Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. And that's maybe what I'll end on, right? Is that I think what astrologers need to do is posit a mechanism that we can then actually test, right? That's what I think. Yes, exactly. Yeah, Bell. Yeah, and that's why even if it is all Barnum statements, maybe it's as long as you're using it to kind of learn something about yourself, maybe it's fine. Like a Rorschach test. So anyway, next time we're going to talk about aliens and UFOs. I have another episode of Cosmos and a chapter from the Demon Haunted World that I would like you to read. I'm also going to make available for I'm going to make available the that declassified report from the U.S. government that was released a few years ago on on UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena. You can take a look at that. Okay, I guess I'll see you all on Wednesday, unless there are any questions about anything. Are there any questions about anything? I know the essay proposal is due soon. That's due on the 6th, correct? I'm pretty sure it is. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So I guess if you have any questions about that, feel free to email me. Um, Otherwise, yeah, I hope you found this informative. I hope I haven't been too much of a downer. For those that like to look at their horoscopes and stuff, hope I wasn't I hope I wasn't a bummer. Um, Always remember, um, oh, a twin theory. Okay, maybe this could be a topic of a paper, Kaya. A twin theory of twins, and I assume you're talking about the different outcomes in the lives of twins, despite having very similar horoscopes. Uh,
Yeah, I was gonna mention that I think there's like research in psychology that shows that twins feel a pressure or triplets feel a pressure to differentiate themselves from one another and then are making conscious decisions to live separate lives, which then could prove the theory that even though they have the same not horoscopes, like astrology signs, that there are differences between them. So I wonder what sort of
hmm.
influence that has over the differences between them is them choosing not to be like their twin or their triplet.
Yeah, that's interesting. Then of course the question would be like, so if these horoscopes are supposed to have some kind of impact, maybe it's not predictive, but like what is it? That's why I'm saying like what we need is a mechanism, right? It's like how is it that these things are actually working? And how is it that one of the twins might violate the predictions of their of their astrological details, right? We need a mechanism, but that would be an interesting thing to explore. Um, all right. Yeah, so next time it's going to be fairly light next time because I'm traveling tomorrow. Um, So we'll talk about what Sagan has to say, both in the book chapter and the documentary. And we can talk about the government report on UAPs, which I think would be very interesting. It's going to be like even more riffy than today. Um, Remember, please, if you have an idea for special topics, please enter your suggestion into the Discord server and I'll use those and make a poll because we have to decide what we're going to talk about next week. I vote Bigfoot, but you also should make some suggestions, all of you. Yeah. Yeah, I guess maybe the horoscope is not like determinative of your life, but is advice, like cosmic advice that you can ignore. Again, astrologers are going to disagree on that. What I need from them is for them to agree on a mechanism. What exactly is it that is happening, right? Two, we have to decide on two. So both our classes for next week. I think that Bigfoot and dreams would be interesting, but I'll make a poll and yeah, we can decide. But we have to do it quickly. So if you have any suggestions, please make sure you put them into the text the text channel on the Discord server by the end of Wednesday's class. Okay? You can also email me a suggestion if you're not on the server. Just go ahead and email me. Okay, that's all for now. I will see you all on Wednesday. Bye. Have fun. Have a nice rest of your Monday and Tuesday. And see you on Wednesday. Take care.